Y'all asked for it, and I listened. Let's talk about Gary Oldman. These are 16 roles from one actor who spent 4 decades becoming someone else entirely for the camera. Gary Oldman grew up working class in South London, was rejected by drama school, and went on to generate over $11 billion at the global box office while building one of the most unpredictable bodies of work in cinema history. What follows is how that happened, role by role, starting with the film he never even wanted to make, Sid and Nancy. Director Alex Cox came to Gary Oldman with Sid and Nancy, a film about the doomed, heroin-fueled relationship between Sex Pistols bassist Sid Vicious and his American girlfriend Nancy Spungen. And Oldman's first instinct was to pass. Punk rock held no interest for him, the Sex Pistols held no interest for him, and yet Cox wanted him badly enough to rush the film's entire funding and production forward, specifically to beat a rival Hollywood project rumored to star Madonna and Rupert Everett. Once Oldman agreed, what followed was one of the most physically punishing preparation processes of his career. To replicate the look of a heroin addict's emaciated body, he put himself on a crash diet of exclusively steamed fish and melon. And the caloric deficit was so extreme that malnourishment set in and he was briefly hospitalized during production. Sid Vicious's mother, Anne Beverly, proved highly cooperative when Oldman came to her for research. She handed over the actual heavy metal chain and padlock her son had worn around his neck, and Oldman used that artifact throughout the entire film. He also learned to play bass guitar and recorded his own vocals for the soundtrack, including a cover of My Way. The critical response was thunderous. Roger Ebert declared him the best young British actor around, but Sex Pistols frontman John Lydon, also known as Johnny Rotten, condemned the film's historical accuracy in his autobiography, calling it a fucking fantasy from someone who missed the punk rock era, though he did concede that Oldman was a bloody good actor. The Spungen family disavowed the project entirely. The working title had been Love Kills, but legal threats forced a late pivot to Sid and Nancy, and the film failed to recoup its $4 million budget theatrically before achieving massive cult status. The harshest review of the performance, though, came from Oldman himself. He has stated repeatedly, "I don't like myself in the movie. No, frankly, I didn't want to make it in the first place." That combination of reluctance, physical commitment, and retrospective self-criticism runs through this entire career. Prick up your ears. 1 year after inhabiting the physical collapse of Sid Vicious, Oldman shed every trace of erratic punk rock decay and pivoted completely to something no one could have predicted. Stephen Frears's Prick Up Your Ears casts him as Joe Orton, the flamboyant, brazenly promiscuous British playwright who became one of the most subversive literary figures of 1960s London, and whose story ends in murder. Orton's older lover and mentor, Kenneth Halliwell, played by Alfred Molina, killed him with a hammer in August 1967 before taking his own life with a barbiturate overdose. Alan Bennett's screenplay, adapted from theater critic John Lahr's 1978 biography, chose not to chase Orton's theatrical voice on screen, focusing instead on the concept of codependency, framing Halliwell as Orton's discarded first wife. Within that frame, Oldman's job was to capture what critics described as Orton's sparrow-like quickness, a man who navigated the illegal homosexual cottage culture of 1960s London with danger-seeking charm and a performative disregard for consequence. The film landed in 1987 as a genuine provocation. Its frank, unadorned depiction of homosexual promiscuity and violence arrived when the cultural climate around homosexuality remained deeply restrictive, and audiences felt the impact. Some critics pushed back on the casting of Alfred Molina, arguing his physical presence resembled a 6-foot misfit with a Kojak scalp rather than the real Halliwell, documented as peppily good-looking, but the dynamic between the two actors anchored the film regardless. A Best Artistic Contribution prize at Cannes followed, along with Oldman's first BAFTA nomination for Best Actor, and a UK theatrical re-release in August 2017 marked the 50th anniversary of Orton's death. 2 films into his screen career, Oldman was already operating in a range that most actors never attempt across an entire lifetime. State of Grace. By 1990, Oldman had made the full move to American cinema, and State of Grace is where Hollywood got its first clear look at what they had. Phil Jono's neo-noir crime drama drops into Hell's Kitchen, New York, the world of the Irish mob, specifically inspired by the real-life street gang known as the Westies. Oldman plays Jackie Flannery, the volatile, unpredictable younger brother of crime boss Frankie Flannery, with Sean Penn opposite him as an undercover cop dragged back into his old world. Robin Wright, John Turturro, John C. Reilly, and an Ennio Morricone score round out a production that should have been one of the defining crime films of its decade. Oldman was the first actor to commit to the project, signing on based solely on the first draft of the script without having seen a single frame of the 28-year-old director's previous work. A genuine risk. Production spread across more than 60 locations in Manhattan, the Bronx, and New Jersey, capturing the texture of a neighborhood on the verge of gentrification. What Oldman built on screen is widely regarded as a masterclass in what industry insiders call drunk acting, one of the hardest technical feats in screen performance without tipping into parody. Jackie's sudden, horrific violence is layered beneath deep vulnerability and a twisted, tragic sense of loyalty, and some of the most memorable moments were improvised entirely, including scenes where Jackie keeps severed hands in a freezer to use the fingerprints on his firearms.
You take your hands, and you take your gun, but you put the prints on the gun, you stash it. The cops find the gun. They're looking for a dead man.
Behind the camera, Oldman reportedly broke the tension during rehearsals with his notoriously intense co-star Sean Penn by spontaneously singing Madonna's "Like a Virgin" at full volume. The commercial failure was brutal and entirely circumstantial. State of Grace opened in theaters the exact same week as Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas, and it was instantly swallowed. Orion Pictures was approaching bankruptcy, and the film vanished from theaters within weeks. A massive cult revival through home video followed, and Leonardo DiCaprio has explicitly named Oldman's performance as Jackie Flannery as a primary career inspiration, stating that it influenced an entire generation of actors. JFK. Oliver Stone's JFK is one of the most controversial American films ever produced, and Oldman's assignment within it was also its most dangerous, playing Lee Harvey Oswald. Stone's film does not frame Oswald as the lone gunman. The narrative positions him as an innocent, manipulated scapegoat caught inside a vast government intelligence conspiracy behind the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, with Kevin Costner as the prosecutor building that case, and Tommy Lee Jones, Joe Pesci, Kevin Bacon, and Sissy Spacek, filling out an ensemble of enormous weight. Stone chose Oldman for the role after seeing Sid and Nancy, specifically because he recognized what he called the necessary dark side in Oldman's performance. The preparation was unconventional by any measure. Very little in the script addressed Oswald's internal psychological state, so Stone handed Oldman a set of plane tickets and a list of contacts and told him to conduct his own journalistic research. Oldman traveled to meet Oswald's widow, Marina, and her 2 daughters, grounding the character in domestic reality rather than political myth. While Costner and the primary cast filmed courtroom sequences, Oldman shot his flashback scenes in near isolation, often speaking directly into the camera. Stone's commitment to hyper-realism extended to one genuinely disturbing moment. During the funeral sequence at Rose Hill Cemetery in Fort Worth, Texas, Oldman was required to physically lie inside Oswald's actual exhumed coffin. Co-stars carrying the casket reported that Oldman was visibly distressed, reportedly freaking out, while sealed inside the real grave. The film itself detonated a national controversy. Major American newspapers ran editorials accusing Stone of rewriting history, particularly the implication that Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was part of a coup. A casting casualty also emerged. Actor Frank Whaley had originally been set to play Oswald, was replaced by Oldman, and Stone later apologized to a heartbroken Whaley before casting him as an Oswald impersonator within the film's own conspiracy narrative. The 6th highest-grossing film of 1991, with 8 Academy Award nominations, the controversy did nothing to slow it down. Bram Stoker's Dracula. JFK proved Oldman could anchor a serious American prestige film. Bram Stoker's Dracula proved he could anchor something entirely different and make it genuinely work. Francis Ford Coppola's lavish, practical effects-driven adaptation follows Count Dracula across multiple timelines and grotesque physical transformations as he pursues a reincarnated love across centuries. Winona Ryder plays Mina, Anthony Hopkins plays Van Helsing, and Keanu Reeves fills a role that attracted intense critical backlash for what many described as wooden delivery and an atrocious English accent, a contrast that made Oldman's vocal mastery stand out even more sharply. The attraction to the role was partly visceral and partly literary. Oldman has stated explicitly that he wanted the part largely because he wanted to deliver the line,
"I have crossed oceans of time to find you."
Vocal preparation was rigorous, with Oldman consciously lowering his register and adopting an archaic, aristocratic cadence built to project ancient menace and tragic romance at the same time. During the early weeks of production, while Coppola focused on the supporting ensemble, Oldman was largely left alone, and he used that time collaborating intensively with the makeup department to develop Dracula's various stages of decay and rejuvenation. Pushing for more practical effects on the character's monstrous forms was a decision he later admitted regretting, given the hours it added in the chair. but the makeup and sound editing teams both took home Academy Awards for that work. The production carried significant interpersonal friction. Ryder later recounted feeling uncomfortable on set, citing Oldman's habit of remaining in character as the brooding, menacing Count throughout the entire shooting day, and Coppola reportedly had to intervene repeatedly during scenes between Oldman and Hopkins to stop the two from trying to upstage each other. Sony Pictures marked the film's 30th anniversary in October 2022 with a 4K Ultra HD restoration, confirming that Coppola's Gothic vision has only gained standing over time. True Romance. Most actors handed 10 minutes of screen time do not define a film. Gary Oldman in True Romance is the exception to that entirely. Tony Scott directed from Quentin Tarantino's screenplay, a violent, hyper-stylized crime film following a young couple on the run from the mob with a stolen suitcase of cocaine. The ensemble around them is extraordinary. Christian Slater, Patricia Arquette, Dennis Hopper, Christopher Walken, Brad Pitt, and then Drexel Spivey walks into the frame, a white Detroit pimp and drug dealer who culturally identifies as an African-American Rastafarian, played by Oldman in what stands as arguably the most efficient scene-stealing performance in cinema history. The character demanded an extraordinarily specific physical and vocal construction. Matted dreadlocks, a scarred face, a dead milky eye, gold teeth, a multicolored shell suit unzipped to the navel, and vocally, African-American vernacular English, layered with a codified Jamaican accent, creating something that occupies its own bizarre, terrifying cultural dimension. Lines like,
You must have thought it was White Boy Day.
and
I know I'm pretty, but I ain't as pretty as a couple of titties.
have been embedded in pop culture ever since, and what keeps them there is the total absence of self-consciousness in the delivery. Drexel Spivey is the clearest possible demonstration of Oldman's core philosophy: total, fearless commitment to an absurd premise, with no apology and no self-protection. A character this extreme could easily collapse into caricature, but Oldman believed in the internal logic of the man completely, which is the only reason it works. The film barely recouped its $12.5 million budget on release, but its cult following has since grown into something enormous, driven in no small part by those 10 unforgettable minutes. Leon, the professional, Norman Stansfield is routinely placed among the greatest movie villains ever committed to film, with MSN Movies describing it as the role that launched 1,000 villains, and the most iconic moment in the entire performance was never supposed to be in the movie at all. Luc Besson's French action thriller casts Oldman as Stansfield, a corrupt, classical music-obsessed Drug Enforcement Administration agent who massacres the family of a 12-year-old girl named Mathilda, played in her film debut by Natalie Portman, with Jean Reno as the professional cleaner who takes her in. To build the character, Oldman conducted ride-alongs with the NYPD's Internal Affairs Division, studying corrupt law enforcement from the inside out. What emerged on screen went well beyond research. Stansfield's terrifying energy runs through an idiosyncratic drug habit. Oldman described the character's unidentified pills as designed to evoke a visceral combination of amphetamines and amyl nitrate, producing bizarre physical contortions, neck cracking, and waves of sudden euphoria. The killings get compared, in Stansfield's own mind, to the music of Beethoven, high culture appreciation fused with psychopathic violence. During one tense scene, Oldman spontaneously sniffed and then hugged the actor playing Matilda's father, a choice absent from any page of the script, and the effect on his young co-star was immediate. Portman later reflected, "Working with Gary Oldman was probably the easiest acting experience of my life, because I don't even remember being directed at all. I just sat there and watched him and was terrified." And then there is the everyone moment, the scene where Stansfield is asked who should be sent as backup.
Bring me everyone.
What do you mean, everyone?
That full-throttle, screamed delivery was improvised entirely, performed as an outtake joke to make Besson laugh on set. Besson kept it in the final cut, and decades later, it became one of the defining pieces of internet meme culture. Studio Canal marked the film's legacy in late 2024, with a 30th anniversary, 4K restoration, confirming that Stansfield's hold on pop culture has not loosened. Immortal Beloved. In the same year, Norman Stansfield was terrifying audiences. Oldman quietly delivered one of the most radically different performances of his career, and almost no one was watching closely enough. Bernard Rose's Immortal Beloved is a biographical mystery. After Ludwig van Beethoven's death, his secretary sets out to identify the woman addressed in 3 unsent letters found among the composer's possessions, addressed only to his immortal beloved. The narrative moves through flashbacks, tracing Beethoven's life from his abusive childhood through his progressive deafness and creative isolation to his greatest works. The film attributes that deafness to physical abuse suffered at the hands of his alcoholic father, a detail that carries particular weight given Oldman's own biography, though he has never explicitly drawn that connection. Playing a musical genius authentically required Oldman to actually play the piano for the role. There was no faking it. The film's most universally praised sequence handles Beethoven's deafness through sophisticated sound design rather than simple silence. During a performance of the Ode to Joy, young Beethoven floats in a starry lake while older Beethoven conducts, and at that moment, the sound cuts out entirely. The audience experiences the same silence the composer himself lived with, reliving the symphony entirely within his own mind, and the sequence has stayed with viewers for decades. $9.9 million at the domestic box office. Modest for a biographical period piece, but the critical standing has held, because what Oldman constructed here, physical anguish, creative isolation, a man severed from the very thing that defined him, demonstrated that his capacity for internalized, devastating restraint was every bit as formidable as his capacity for explosive chaos. The Harry Potter movies. There is a version of Gary Oldman's career that simply does not exist without Harry Potter, and the reason is practical rather than artistic. In the early 2000s, global film production shifted significantly toward tax-friendly hubs in Prague, Hungary, and Australia. Oldman had gone through a divorce and gained custody of his young sons, and travel of that scale was off the table. His career options were quietly narrowing, and what changed that, his word, was being cast as Sirius Black, the misunderstood godfather of the titular young wizard. Beginning with Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban in 2004 and running through the franchise's conclusion in 2011, the practical calculation was straightforward. The films shot primarily in the United Kingdom, which meant Oldman could remain at home with his children while working on one of the highest-profile franchises in the world. He has said openly that the role allowed him to do the least amount of work for the most amount of money, and that language tells you exactly how he categorized the job at the time. What the franchise delivered in return was an entirely new generation of fans, many of whom encountered Sirius Black before they ever found Stansfield or Jackie Flannery or Lee Harvey Oswald. But Oldman's internal assessment of his own performance has never been generous. In late 2023, he publicly described his work as Sirius Black as mediocre, and the reasoning behind that word is characteristically precise. Unlike his late co-star Alan Rickman, who had read all of the books and understood exactly where Snape was heading, Oldman did not read ahead. He did not know the full arc of the character he was inhabiting, and that gap mattered to him. He stated,
"Maybe if I had read the books like Alan, I honestly think I would have played it differently."
Wow.
Applied retroactively to one of the most beloved franchise characters of the era, that level of self-scrutiny is a window into how seriously Oldman takes the craft even when circumstances forced him to treat a job as a paycheck. The Contender. Before Harry Potter stabilized his career, Oldman found himself at the center of one of Hollywood's most unusual behind-the-scenes disputes, and it had nothing to do with anything on screen. Rod Lurie's political thriller The Contender casts him as Shelley Runyon, a staunch conservative Republican congressman attempting to derail a female Democratic vice presidential nominee, played by Joan Allen, by exposing a past sexual scandal. Jeff Bridges, Christian Slater, and Sam Elliott fill out the ensemble, and Oldman also served as a producer on the film alongside his manager Douglas Urbanski. The reason he signed on was specific. The script, as he read it, gave Runyon genuine moral conviction rather than simple villainy. Ambiguity was built into the character, and that ambiguity was what interested him. What ended up on screen was, by Oldman and Urbanski's account, something else entirely. They publicly accused the distributor DreamWorks, helmed at the time by Steven Spielberg, David Geffen, and Jeffrey Katzenberg, all prominent Democratic supporters, of re-editing the film to reflect their own partisan interests. Urbanski's language was not restrained. He compared the studio's editorial choices to the propaganda techniques of Joseph Goebbels, claiming the cuts and musical cues had been deliberately engineered to frame the Democrat as a flawless heroine and Oldman's Republican as an irredeemable bad guy. Critic Roger Ebert later disputed the severity of Oldman's personal denunciation, but the underlying point stood: strip the moral ambiguity from a character Oldman built around moral ambiguity, and he will say something about it publicly. A Screen Actors Guild Award nomination and the Critics' Choice Alan J. Pakula Award for his performance confirmed that whatever the studio did in the editing room, what Oldman had put on camera was worth preserving. The Dark Knight Trilogy. If Harry Potter saved Oldman's ability to work while raising his children, the Dark Knight Trilogy gave him something equally necessary: a prestige platform that reminded the industry he could carry dramatic weight without a villain's mask. Christopher Nolan's revitalized Batman franchise runs from Batman Begins in 2005 through The Dark Knight in 2008 and The Dark Knight Rises in 2012, with Oldman as James Gordon, the incorruptible Gotham City detective who eventually becomes commissioner, and the one figure in the city whose integrity is never seriously challenged. The backstory of how he got there is revealing. Nolan had originally intended to cast Oldman in a villainous role, rumored to be either Ra's al Ghul or the Scarecrow, working from Oldman's established 1990s reputation as a reliable screen antagonist. Oldman's own manager suggested pitching him as Jim Gordon instead, and the pivot changed the entire character. What Oldman brought to Gordon was the lived-in, unshowy texture of a man ground down by the system over many years but not yet broken by it. And the physical fatigue visible in Gordon's demeanor across all three films was drawn directly from the grinding demands of the massive production schedule itself. Playing the moral compass of a blockbuster, the still point around which chaos rotates, was a different kind of challenge than anything in his 1990s work, and he relished it. Together, the Batman franchise and the Harry Potter series built the financial foundation that allowed Oldman to step away from franchise work entirely and move back into prestige cinema on his own terms. And without that foundation, the final chapter of his career, the chapter that includes an Oscar, likely does not happen. Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. After years of franchise work, Oldman stepped back into prestige adult drama with Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy and proved, without any ambiguity, that he belonged at the very top of that conversation. Tomas Alfredson's Cold War espionage thriller adapts John le Carré's novel, following the aging, taciturn British intelligence officer, George Smiley, as he emerges from retirement to identify a Soviet mole at the highest levels of British intelligence. Colin Firth, Tom Hardy, John Hurt, and Mark Strong fill out a formidable ensemble, with Oldman sitting at the center of it, barely moving. The challenge was historical and technical at the same time. Alec Guinness had played Smiley in a legendary BBC television adaptation, and the character carries deep cultural weight in British consciousness. Rather than compete with Guinness on Guinness's terms, Oldman chose absolute stillness, describing the role as playing characters where the silence is loud, a performance that demands the audience track micro-expressions rather than react to physical energy. Everything he had built his reputation on in the 1990s, volatility, physical transformation, explosive improvisation, got set aside in favor of something quieter and, for this particular role, far more effective. $81.2 million at the global box office, against a $21 million budget, with 3 consecutive weeks atop the UK box office. The numbers confirmed that Oldman could open a cerebral adult drama as a leading man. More importantly, the performance finally earned him his first Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, a recognition that many in the industry had considered overdue for the better part of 2 decades. Air Force One. 1997 was the year Oldman appeared in 2 massive blockbusters, and his motivations for both had very little to do with artistic fulfillment. Wolfgang Petersen's Air Force One runs on the simplest possible premise. A ruthless Russian neo-Soviet terrorist named Egor Korshunov hijacks the plane carrying the President of the United States. Harrison Ford plays the president, and Oldman plays Korshunov with genuine menace that elevates what is essentially a tight genre exercise into something more credible than it has any right to be. Glenn Close and William H. Macy round out the cast, and the film became the 5th highest-grossing film of 1997 globally. The honest account of why Oldman took the role is one of the most refreshingly direct things about his career. A divorce had come and gone, full custody of his young sons followed, and the priority was straightforward. He needed to stay financially stable and physically present for his children. Lucrative studio projects that required minimal time commitment became the solution, and Oldman famously referred to this category of high-paying, clean studio work as necessary for paying school fees. No pretense that Air Force One was a creative calling. No inflation of the artistic stakes. It was a transaction in service of fatherhood. The remarkable thing is that even operating in transactional mode, Oldman still constructed an antagonist with real gravity, because showing up halfway simply does not appear to be available to him as an option. Mank. David Fincher's Mank tells the story of Herman J. Mankiewicz, the brilliant, washed-up, perpetually drunk Hollywood screenwriter who drafted what many consider the greatest American film ever made, Citizen Kane. Shot in black and white, moving at the speed of the 1940s, Hollywood it inhabits, the film required Oldman to do something he had demonstrated only once before at this length: play a man in an almost constant state of varying intoxication without ever crossing into caricature. The Fincher-Oldman collaboration had been circling for over 20 years. Oldman had declined a role in Alien 3, and the two had stayed in each other's orbit until Mank finally aligned them. Released via Netflix, the film earned Oldman his third Academy Award nomination for Best Actor, alongside nominations from the Golden Globes and the Screen Actors Guild. The specific technical challenge was the light touch Fincher demanded for Mankiewicz. This is not the explosive drunk acting of State of Grace, where Jackie Flannery's violence erupted from beneath the alcohol. Mank requires something more interior and more precise. Oldman had to deliver rapid-fire, genuinely witty dialogue while calibrating the exact degree of intoxication in every scene as Mankiewicz dried out in isolation in a shack in Victorville, California, to complete the Kane script under deadline. Critics singled out his ability to portray inebriation with deep realism, a skill first demonstrated 30 years earlier in Hell's Kitchen. Returning to that register 3 decades later with even more precision and even less showmanship is exactly the kind of progression that separates a great actor from a merely good one. The fifth element. Jean-Baptiste Emmanuel Zorg may be the role Gary Oldman loves to hate, and the deal that produced it was one of the stranger transactions of his entire career. Luc Besson's hyper-stylized science fiction epic pits Bruce Willis against a corporate tyrant willing to assist the destruction of all life in the universe for reasons that are never entirely coherent, and Zorg is the film's most gleefully ridiculous element. Oldman built the character around a bizarre southern drawl accent explicitly based on a mixture of politician Ross Perot and the cartoon character Bugs Bunny. Wore an asymmetrical plastic haircut that appeared to be a mistake, and spent the production inside a rubber wardrobe designed by Jean-Paul Gaultier. Here is how it actually happened. Oldman accepted the role without reading the script, because the role was a transactional favor rather than an artistic choice. In exchange for playing Zorg, Besson provided crucial financing and producer support for Oldman's own passion project, his raw, semi-autobiographical directorial debut, Nil by Mouth, a film about alcoholism and domestic violence in South London that went on to earn a Palme d'Or nomination at Cannes and won 2 BAFTA awards. The math made sense, even if the haircut did not. Oldman has been startlingly candid about his feelings toward Zorg. He has stated, "I can't bear it. I was the one who had that haircut, and I was the one who was wearing rubber." His co-star Bruce Willis, he revealed, was equally miserable about his own wardrobe. Specifically, the tight orange vest his character was forced to wear throughout the film. Only recently has Oldman's wife managed to soften his stance on the whole thing, assuring him of the film's genuine merit. $263 million globally, says the audience disagrees with him entirely, and Zorg remains one of the most beloved science fiction antagonists of the 1990s, whether Oldman can bear it or not. Darkest Hour. Everything Gary Oldman has ever done, the physical extremity, the accent work, the prosthetics, the research immersion, converged in Joe Wright's Darkest Hour, and the performance nearly broke him to produce. Joe Wright's film follows Winston Churchill during the agonizing early weeks of World War II. Specifically the period when Britain faced the real possibility of total military defeat, and Churchill had to decide whether to negotiate with Hitler or fight on. Kristen Scott Thomas plays Clementine Churchill, Lily James plays his secretary, and Ben Mendelsohn plays King George VI. But Oldman is in almost every frame, buried under 14 pounds of silicone rubber body prosthetics built by renowned makeup artist Kazuhiro Tsuji, a man Oldman personally persuaded to return to the film industry specifically for this project. Over 200 hours in the makeup chair across the production, and approximately $20,000 worth of Cuban cigars smoked during the shoot, a habit that ultimately gave him nicotine poisoning before filming ended. None of that is what made the performance. Oldman has drawn a specific and important line between what he calls an impression and a genuine performance. An impression paints, with a broad stroke, hitting the well-known external markers and calling it done. What he pursued beneath the prosthetics was something harder to manufacture. Churchill's bombast and his private terror, his oratorical genius, and the vulnerability underneath it, the weight of a man who understood that the words he chose in the next few weeks might determine the fate of Western civilization. The award sweep that followed was total. Academy Award, Golden Globe, BAFTA, and Screen Actors Guild Award for Best Actor, all in the same season. The question of whether Gary Oldman deserved institutional recognition for his body of work was permanently and definitively answered. If you are watching this, and Harry Potter or Batman is the only Oldman you know, go find State of Grace, go find Prick Up Your Ears, go find Leon, and go find True Romance. There is a career underneath those franchises that will permanently change the way you see what screen acting can actually be. If you enjoyed this deep dive about Gary Oldman, you're going to love the video on your screen, so go check it out now.